Professor Barati here. I'd like to review Chapter 6, Homework. I've done a algorithmic homework problem. Basically, it's the same homework problem, different numbers, maybe different percentages. Some students have requested that they're having difficulty setting up the schedule. Now, some of you have done a very good job with your spreadsheets in your discussion, and some of you have done some good work on homework, and perhaps you might want to interact or allow me to send some of those spreadsheets to some of the other students that are struggling. It might be helpful, but I'm going to try to help people who are struggling with process costing. And for those of you who've got it down, this will be just a good review. So the homework 631, we have a chemical company that refines petrochemical products. So this is not a job costing system. This is a process costing system. So the information they give us is our work in process inventory at the beginning of the month, September 1st, in gallons. They're telling us direct materials are 50% complete, conversion costs are 20% complete. So as I've stated in other videos, emphasize that when we're not giving a completion for direct materials, you assume it's 100%. But I chose this problem because it makes you work a little harder and think a little harder. It's not just your normal 100% default. So in this case, they're actually telling us that the equivalent units for direct materials, they're 50% completed in the equivalent unit calculation. The units started in process during September, meaning units that went into production, or gallons, was 6,320,000 gallons. At the end of September 30th, the month end, our ending WIP balance was 2,890,000 gallons. And our work in process inventory for direct materials was 40% complete. Conversion cost was 60%. So what's not given here in this problem is the number of gallons completed. But if your knowledge of, if you know how to calculate the physical units, you'll know that it's just a simple algebraic function. It's the X factor that you will easily figure out. So what's required is compute the equivalent units of direct materials and conversion for the month of September using weighted average method. And then B, compute the equivalent units of direct materials and conversion using the FIFO method. So let's start with our step 1. Summarize physical units. So we start with beginning, WIP, September 1st, of 4,420,000 gallons. Add to that units started, in process for September, and that's 5,620,000. So units to account for is the summary of these two. Part 2 of our summarized physical units are we're going to take the work in process and the completed units and they should equal units to account for. So WIP at the end of September, ending WIP is 2,720,000 gallons. WIP completed is unknown. So completed gallons is the unknown. So ending WIP plus completed has to equal beginning WIP plus started. We know the units to account for is 10,040,000 gallons. Therefore, the difference is something we have to calculate. So gallons completed, 7,320,000. The next step is step 2 is determine our equivalent units of production. So we have direct materials, and conversion costs. Conversion costs, as you all know, equals direct labor plus manufacturing overhead. So set up this matrix, and what we're going to do is flow the physical units into the direct materials buckets and the conversion buckets by applying the equivalent units percent completed that has been given to us. Now they tell us that beginning WIP, the direct materials are 50% completed. On the beginning WIP, conversion costs, labor and manufacturing overhead that is in our beginning WIP as gallons is 20% completed. So, work your matrix. Take 50% of 4,420,000 beginning WIP as your direct materials. Take 20% of your beginning WIP as conversion costs. This section here, units started, current production, or transferred in, you'll see that also come up, is unknown. We don't know the percent completed for materials and conversion costs because they were just simply, they came in as debits to our WIP account. So we don't know the breakdown of those costs yet. It's just one big pool. Now let's go to our ending WIP. Our work in progress, process ending inventory. They tell us it's 40% complete for direct materials and 60% complete for conversion costs. So let's allocate the WIP, ending WIP, 2,720,000 gallons. According to our production, 40% of direct materials are considered complete. So what we're doing here and here is converting these gallons into equivalent units. So the equivalent unit of our direct materials for ending WIP inventory is 40%. Our ending WIP inventory of 2,720,000 gallons on the conversion cost for direct labor and manufacturing overhead, the equivalent unit, it's considered to be 60% complete. So 60% of the gallons are completed with direct labor and manufacturing overhead. So I'm going to take this out because you might get confused and think that completed is 60%. It's really just the beginning and ending WIPs. I put it there so I could do a formula. Now the next step is, it's not going to be given to you in the problem. You need to know this as part of the theory. Completed units in a WIP inventory account are always 100% complete. For something to be completed, it has to have 100% of direct materials in it, 100% of the direct labor, and 100% of the manufacturing overhead for it to be complete. Therefore, the equivalent unit of a completed unit is 100%. It's essentially a finished good. It's credited to WIP and debited to finished goods through the inventory cost flow. So simply just take the completed summarized physical unit and take 100% of it. Therefore, your weighted average equivalent units is going to be the sum of your equivalent units that you've calculated for ending WIP and completed. This section here, the lower section. Now, some of you have been a little confused over how this is computed. The textbook goes through a lengthy process for showing you how to compute it. Essentially, it's going to take this plus the completed plus the ending minus beginning. But over the years, by doing this, you realize that it's simply the difference between what you calculated on the top as beginning WIP and the weighted average total. So this is going to simply equal total equivalent units minus beginning WIP equivalent units. It's a plug. Because the top section all the way across has to equal the bottom section all the way across in the physical summarized units as well as the equivalent units. Now, if you're just doing equivalent units, if the problem asks you to compute only the weighted average equivalent unit, you don't need to do this step that I've highlighted here. You already have the answer. The reason why I highlight this and do it is because you have to do a FIFO problem. The difference between weighted average equivalent units and FIFO is that weighted average equivalent unit is concerned with the weighted average of the ending WIP and units completed, the total. The FIFO is only concerned with first in, first out. It's only concerned with the current production, which is first in. And there's your FIFO equivalent units. Now, some of the problems you may come across will have cost information. So the next part would be to compute the cost per equivalent unit for weighted average and the FIFO, which I sent you a video on how to do that. And the cost for weighted average and FIFO are basically two different calculations. The cost will be based on the beginning WIP cost and the unit started cost, direct labor, direct materials, direct labor, and manufacturing overhead. Those costs are basically added up and divided by the weighted average to get a weighted average cost per equivalent unit. Then you simply allocate that cost per unit for your direct materials and your conversion costs to your ending WIP and your gallons completed WIP to allocate. On the FIFO end, you're concerned only with the cost of current production. You're not interested in the beginning WIP cost, just the cost for current production. So on the FIFO, you're going to take your current equivalent units and you're going to take your costs that are related for materials and conversion, only current production, divided by your unit started equivalent unit to get your cost per equivalent unit. Then you're going to allocate that equivalent unit FIFO to your ending WIP by taking the number of gallons equivalent unit multiplied by the FIFO cost per unit. Under FIFO, do not take the equivalent units here and multiply it by the cost per equivalent unit. It's not weighted average. You'd be making a mistake. All you do is take the total cost, subtract it from the WIP cost that you just calculated. Essentially another plug. You're coming up with the difference to get your completed. Now, if this were a T account, it's going to balance for your WIP. So your beginning WIP is going to be 4,420,000. Started is 5,620,000. Completed is 7,320,000. And ending is going to be 2,720,000. So this concludes our Chapter 6 homework, how to do process cost, weighted average equivalent unit, and a FIFO equivalent unit. Again, some of the students did some very good spreadsheets, some of it very similar to this, some of them perhaps even better than the one I just did, a little more logical, some less shortcuts than I did. But overall, the key to doing this is setting up the matrix and taking your costs from physical units and determining the direct materials and conversion costs and so on. Know that your completed are always 100%. Know that your unit started is going to be the difference between your total WIP plus completed, direct materials and conversion, minus your beginning WIP, equivalent unit, direct material and conversion. Thank you.